Bom dia a todos, estamos aqui com o David Allen. O David Allen é amplamente reconhecido como sendo o mais importante expert em produtividade pessoal e organizacional do mundo. Seus 30 anos de pesquisa pioneira e coaching com gestores e CEOs das organizações mais importantes do mundo fizeram com que a Forbes o reconhecesse como um dos 5 melhores coaches dos Estados Unidos. A revista Time diz que seu livro GTD, ou A Arte de Fazer Acontecer, é o livro da década de autodesenvolvimento profissional. Já a revista Fast Company reconhece o David como sendo um dos pensadores de maior influência no mundo em termos de produtividade. Ou seja, o cara não é fraco, não. Eu vou entrevistá-lo, eu sou Daniel Burdi, eu sou coach, instrutor GTD, eu sou da Cal Daniel. A Cal Daniel vem representando o GTD com exclusividade no Brasil há mais de 10 anos. E a gente tem desenvolvido relacionamentos de longa duração com organizações do tipo Bradesco, Itaú, BASF, Behringer, Siemens, Nike, iFood. Todas elas usam o GTD. We will start our conversation speaking about David as a person. And then we will talk about GTD and all those things. So David, starting from the beginning, do you remember what do you like to play with when you were a kid? What kind
I like to garden. My mother gave me seeds to plant, and I loved flowers from the beginning. When I was a kid, there were only 2 things I wanted to be when I grew up, a gardener and a comedian, because I loved comedy and I loved making people laugh, and I loved it when people laughed, looked like they were much happier and so forth. So those were my 2, aspirations at age 5 or 6 or 7, I guess.
Well, wonderful. Gardening, that's we can see gardening in your book and some examples there, I think.
Well, gardening provides a great metaphor for our work. 80% of gardening is cleaning up.
That's perfect. Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah. And things are never quite the way you plan them, because plants tend to want to do what they do where they want to do it. So fantastic. You have to be flexible and ready for anything. Oh, that should be a book.
Excellent. And were you an introvert or extrovert? Because you're telling that you love to make people laugh. And were you extrovert?
I kind of looked like an extrovert, but in all the studies and all the profiles, that came out later on, I'm actually an introvert. So as we say, I'm a closet introvert. I'm kind of a hidden introvert. So I developed sort of the ability to be able to express myself externally, fairly comfortably, but I couldn't do that very long before I had to have my own quiet time and go inner. So I'm actually an introvert, though most people wouldn't know that.
So when you need energy, what do you do to recover?
Oh, meditation, have a glass or 2 of wine. I just take a walk with the dog. Basically, allow myself to just free form, think and relax.
Excellent. Have you done something very crazy when you were a teenager or a young person? Something that you remember?
Oh, I did a lot of crazy things. I mean, I was actually I kind of cooperated with everybody. I made great grades in school. I was friends with everybody. I was friends with my teachers. I found out it was a lot easier to make good grades if you made friends with the teachers early on. And if you worked really hard the first 6 weeks so that you made really good grades, then they thought you were smart. Then they just then assumed you were smart and for the rest of the year, and you didn't have to work so hard. So crazy. But I did there were some crazy things I did. For one thing, well, I don't know how crazy it was, because I love to kind of act out and be a comedian. My mother gave me, for my birthday, on my 11th birthday, she gave me acting lessons at the local community theater. And so then I happened to get a leading child's role as an actor in, where I grew up in Shreveport. And so that gave me the experience of actually being on stage, in a semi-professional production of The King and I, which was brilliant and was great. It was a fabulous experience. So that was kind of radical, that I was, as an 11-year-old, I would go, be an actor and go to cast parties and so forth. Another kind of radical thing I did was, well, I didn't sort of keep on acting after I, got a little older, but when I was in high school, I was a debater, and then I became a state champion debater. And that was kind of risky to do. I got to learn to stand up and speak extemporaneously and defend some sort of position, against other people. And then a radical thing I did was, we had an exchange student in our high school from Germany when I was, I think I was 16 or 17, and it sort of intrigued me. Be an exchange student, that's kind of big, that'd be cool. So I actually applied with the American Field Service, AFS, which is in the US anyway. That was the field service, and what most of the Americans, they actually brought kids from around the world to the US, because it was easier to find a sort of a US family that would be willing to take a kid for a year. They didn't have many Americans. Most of the Americans went for the summer, because they couldn't find a lot of families internationally that would be willing to pay for, having a kid for a whole year. But they did have a small program of that. So I signed up for that, and I wound up there were only 300 of us from the whole US that year that went. And it could have been anywhere in the world, anywhere that the family was willing to take someone. So I wound up living with a Swiss family for a year in 1963, 64, and went to a Swiss school, learned to speak a little bit of High German and then a little bit of Swiss German. That was pretty radical. And it took an extra year. A lot of kids that did that sort of managed to get credit and go on to college. I didn't know really what I wanted to do or which college I wanted to go to. So I took an extra year. So I was one of the oldest to graduate in my high school class, because, I took an extra year, to just go live in Switzerland and do that. So that was pretty radical. Then I did a radical thing, which was pick a college to go to that was one of those experimental colleges back in the 60s, where no grades, independent study, design your own curriculum, large faculty, small student body, that was funded by a lot of sort of rich people that wanted to see what that experiment would be like, then. And so I went to a college called New College of Sarasota, Florida, and graduated in 3 years with a degree in history. But in the middle of that, see, we did a lot of independent study projects where if you could get a faculty person to okay it, you could go do anything, and as long as it had some sort of an academic, basis to it. So I wound up. So one of the things I did wasn't exactly on my program. I sort of changed things midstream, but I took about 6 weeks and I hitchhiked through the Middle East from Istanbul all the way to Karachi. So I hitchhiked all the way through Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan.
How old were you?
This is 1967. So golly, I must have been 22 when I did that.
Wonderful.
Stupid. If I'd known, if I'd even looked at a map, I wouldn't have never done it. But I met some people who were traveling and they wanted somebody to travel with them. So I did that. So so that was pretty risky business stuff to do. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I got more and more and more stories. You don't need to hear any more of that. That's enough. That's enough. Yeah.
Okay, that's. I think it's enough, and it's beautiful. Beautiful to know a little bit about your background, those crazy things that were not so crazy, but about this school, I think it's fascinating. It's very, very modern what you did in 1960. This college is really, really modern.
Yeah,
And
it's
now,
still it's still there, by the way. Anybody wants to look up New College of Sarasota, Florida, it's still there.
that's
Quite
fantastic.
it got quite a reputation. Yeah.
And traveling now for today. Okay, now we are today. Uh, do you have any hobby?
Well, I'm painting. Those are mine on the wall. And also, I picked up the flute again. About
Flute.
30 years ago, I decided, because I was traveling so much, I wanted to get back into music again. I played the piano when I was a kid, classical piano, and did a little bit of jazz and rock and roll piano when I was in high school. And then, but I wanted to pick up music again, but I was traveling so much. I said, well, what can I travel with that's small enough to travel? And so I decided to teach myself the flute. So I wound up getting a flute, taught myself to play, pretty well. And then it got stolen at some point. It was really an elegant flute, and I couldn't afford to replace it with a flute as good as I wanted. So I kind of gave that up. And then about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I said, yeah, I really want to pick up music again in that way. So I went and bought a brand new pearl flute, which is gorgeous, here in the Netherlands. So I have a flute too. So flute and painting. I also play Go on the computer with myself.
Really? Oh,
Yeah. No, I learned to play Go when I was 16 or 17. So that's always been fun, for me to do. Photography, I love. At one point in college, I had my own darkroom and my own Minolta camera. It was great. So I don't do a lot of that, but I do have, a lovely camera, and every once in a while, do a lot of stuff with that. So I think I added up, I think I've had 30 hobbies, over my life. And I seem to have about a 2.2 year limit to my hobbies. I sort of get into it. So sailing at one point did for a couple of years, had my own boat. Raising bonsai plants, I did for 2 years. Had my own little greenhouse in Ojai, California, where Catherine and I lived. Ikebana, I love. I'd say that's still kind of a hobby. I don't do it really, really rigorously, like studied it in that way, but I love, simple little, little things,
hours,
like
arrangement.
this, well, you can see, I kind of like those Zen sort of minimalist kind of empty space sorts of things. And Ikebana is great because, they only last for a few days. Bonsai was tough because you really, really have to spend almost full time, making those work. And you can't take them anywhere else. You can't enjoy them anywhere else other than where you're growing them. So anyway, more than you need to know, but
No, that's
had
perfect.
many hobbies. I played bridge. I played poker. What else did I do? Lots of karate, of course. I got a black belt in the martial arts in my 20s when I dropped out of graduate school.
Excellent. But today, the current ones are the flute and the painting and Go are the current ones, the ones that you are active now. Is that correct?
Yeah, the flute and painting are active now. I also took up golf for a while, but that was just too expensive. It took too much time to keep going with that. So,
but I think that you are painting more than 2.2 years. Is that right?
No, it's been about that long. So, I've always liked doing that. I've always liked drawing and painting, but I never really studied it. And then I took some really excellent classes, 4 or 5 years ago in the States about color and about how to draw. And, they wasn't like rigorous study, but it was enough to give me enough confidence that I could, put like I'm staring at a blank canvas right now, right in front of me, kind of like, okay, write the great Brazilian novel, Daniel. So stare at a blank, screen. What would I say? How would I start? What am I going to do? So that's fun. It's fun to sort of challenge myself. What's the next?
Beginning is not easy, I think, starting on a blank canvas. David, speaking about your day, Could you describe for us a typical day? At what time you wake up and where GTD interwolves with your day, if you have a checklist or a to-do list, or how is your day?
Well, my day starts the night before. I mean, that's basically the first thing I do at night before I sort of leave the world and go to sleep. I check in on the next day, sometimes the next 2 or 3 days, just to get a sense in my psyche about the sort of the hard landscape coming toward me, the things that I really need to do on tomorrow, because I love to sleep, and that lets me know how long I can sleep. So that's what I need to check in on. I don't plan very much, unless I need to or have to. But I'm a lot of things in my life right now are not that complex. Obviously, the new apartment, is a big one. I have a Google Docs and a Google Sheet already set up that Catherine and I share to grab all the ideas we have, and how much we're already paying for things, and every single thing you could think about, about the new apartment we capture as soon as we have them. So that just happens ad hoc when it happens. As you know, I don't keep anything in my head. So my head has the idea, let me park it, there, or obviously in my capture tool somewhere until I get it into there. So my day starts the night before. In the morning, first thing I do is, walk the dog. So she needs to go out, and eat, and then we have a wonderful little pot of French pressed coffee that my wife and I share, and a glass of lemon water to cleanse my system. And then I sit down and kind of check out. I look just quickly and see what's on my schedule today. Again, remind myself just to see whether I need to do something anytime soon or not. And I may do not so much an emergency scan, but a brief sort of informal scan of my email. Because a lot of my work these days is simply correspondence and responding to things and doing things like this interview with you. And so I check in on that, because that's just kind of another way to sort of look at my day. And then, of course, with COVID, not much you can do anywhere else other than at home. So, I have an at-home list, and that has all the stuff that I might need to do. Videos, as you know, I've done some videos for you. So those things might be on my list. And I say, okay, but I don't plan those. I don't write those, I just do what I feel like doing. And what gives me the freedom to do what I feel like doing is because I live and breathe GTD. Nothing in my head. It's all externalized in the system. I can step back at any point in time and kind of see the whole landscape, and then allow myself to make good intuitive choices about, what to do, at any point in time. And other than that, and having a protein drink, in the morning, everything else is just kind of ad hoc. Walking the dog, fixing lunch and dinner, and dealing with the email and other work and other things that I might need to be doing, in terms of any kind of recordings or videos, or right now, a huge project is learning Dutch. So, I'm taking lessons so that we can pass the immigration exam, next year. And so that's when I'm not doing anything else, that's pretty much what I'm doing is memorizing words and vocabulary, and and getting more and more comfortable with the language.
Are these learning with a teacher or self-learning? How are you learning?
There's lots of different things. Actually, I'm using Anki. There's a guy who wrote Fluent Forever, which is a great, utilizing sort of the new methodology about memorizing words with staged sequences of them. So you don't sit there and memorize 100 of them. You memorize the ones, and then you can say, well, that was easy, or that was hard, or give me that one again. And so you keep doing it. And the program, there's a program, Anki, ANKI, that does that extremely well. And so the book Fluent Forever said, get that program. That's the best thing to do. And the way to learn the language is to bypass translation. So if I'm trying to learn the word for dog, which is hond, in Dutch, don't have the word dog anywhere. Just have a picture of a dog, and then the back of the flip card is hond. So then I just start to translate. Okay, when I see that, that's a hond. That's not that's a dog, which translates to
Dog,
home.
and
I
then,
bypass the translation process. It takes a little longer, but those things stick forever once you do it. So that's
excellent.
why he calls Fluent Forever. That's the name of his book, and that he did. He was an opera singer, and so he had to learn a lot of language to sing opera, and then started to get fascinated by the whole linguistic process and how you learn languages that way. So that's kind of the main thing I'm doing. And I have Bobble and I have Duolingo, and gee,
Everything.
and if I could learn to read this book, in Dutch.
Wonderful, wonderful.
that would be a big lesson to practice. So
your goal, your vision. Excellent. And any other ritual during your day, like when the day ends, or?
No, not really. I mean, pretty much I'm doing, projects and errands and stuff to do and things that are, kind of the business of life stuff or the business of business stuff up until we eat dinner. After that, some wine and Netflix or, some movie on the TV, is pretty much a way to zone out.
Excellent. And you said that your mind is empty. And could you?
Well, your mind is never empty. I mean, really, your mind is always thinking about something, but there's nothing banging around in there that I should be distracted, that would distract me or says, wow, you ought to be doing X, Y, and Z, David, instead of talking to Danielle right now. But so, yeah, it's empty, meaning empty of reminders of things that I need to be reminded about.
Yeah, yeah. And do you remember how it is to have your mind full of reminders, or this is something very distant in time?
Well, Daniel, come on, you're in this business too. Most people don't even realize that they have that going on.
Yes.
Unless they taste something different.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the last thing a fish notices is water. So the last thing people notice is what's on their mind, why it's on their mind, and that they could have anything not on their mind. So, as that's our job, is to sort of educate people that there is another place to be. So I wasn't born with, I didn't wake up one morning, suddenly clear mind. No, it was it was a process. It was a process to experience these techniques and then see how much difference it made in terms of freeing up my energy and my attention. Yeah. And I wasn't broken. People often ask me, gee, David, most people who come up with something as popular as what you came up with probably had some significantly negative experience that then they learned something about that. No, I was fine, relatively speaking. My life was okay. But then as I started my consulting practice, I had a great mentor who would come up with a couple of these techniques to be able to free executives thinking so that he could then manage organizational change processes. Because he discovered early on that organizations have a hard time changing and moving forward into the future if they have a lot of old business dragging them down like big barnacles on a ship. And so he discovered a way to unhook all those old open loops simply by having executives and then all of their people and then everybody in the company empty everything out of their heads, make sure they had in baskets, make sure they captured whatever those things were, made sure they made next action decisions about the things that were open loops. Yeah. Just to prepare them, for significant work. It turns out, though, that was so significant, that solved a lot of the problems to begin with. All you had to do was get people to sort of identify what's got their attention. Oh, I got this big problem. We have this thing going on. I said, great. Well, what would you like to have true about that? Oh, well, we need to get closure on that. Great. What's your next step? And that handles so many, issues that you don't have to go in much further than just to get people to get clear about what's got their attention, and then, get them appropriately engaged with moving the needle on it. And, as that doesn't take a lot. That's not hard to do. It's difficult to recognize that you need to do that.
Yes. I will go into GTD in 1 second. I have just one last question about yourself, David. Could you share with us, what do you have on your horizons, like 5th level on the 5 horizon, like your mission or your vision?
Well, there's kind of a personal one and a spiritual one, which is basically just to keep my energies to tap as high a level of frequency of energy as I can tap into, and then experience it and express it, however best that comes to me. And I've had 50 years of conscious practice of, both meditation as well as, just a spiritual context about that. So that's probably the most inner version of that. Professionally, career-wise, my work-wise, that mission is to, create a world where people perceive problems as projects, so that we get this world to get in the driver's seat and get out of reaction and worrying and complaining modes. And so, I don't know how much of a dent I and you and all of us doing this work are going to make in that by any point in time, but what the heck, anything we do in that regard improves conditions for everybody we touch. So, purpose is not something, or mission is not something that you get to at some point. It's what you're doing now, right? It's the driver, this essentially the prime motivator of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't want to ever do anything that would stop people from doing what I just said, or somehow get in the way of people being able to, perceive problems as projects.
Yeah. I think it's very simple, easy to understand, very clear. I think it's beautiful.
Well, it took me a long time to get to that point. I mean, there's a lot of a lot of miles of my tires, Daniel. I'll be 75 in a couple of weeks. So, been around the block for a while.
David, now going to GTD. I've heard sometimes you sharing the story of how it was born and how it became. Could you share with the Brazilian guys the story of GTD?
Sure. Well, we didn't call it GTD. I didn't call anything GTD until we wrote the book. And I wrote the book about 20 years after I started working with all of this stuff. So, everything all the beginnings were not, quote, GTD. That just became a shorthand for the book itself. Kind of became this brand that sort of ran out from under us, after the book showed up. But the beginnings of what was essentially the inner workings or the methodology was really uncovering. I didn't make up, but I uncovered or discovered or recognized the best practices about how did we get clear. And again, it probably started with some of the personal growth and self-development trainings that I was doing. Come on, I was in Berkeley in the 60s and 70s, so that was very rich time for a lot of the intensive personal growth and personal development kinds of trainings and seminars. And many of them had a component about agreements, the power of keeping agreements and the downside, the negative results when you break agreements. And that's not only with other people, it's also with yourself. And so understanding what are the agreements you've made, and that was only a small piece of a whole curriculum in personal growth out there, had a lot to do with that. However, it turned out that had a lot to do with what we would call incompletions in your life. But anything that's incomplete, you've agreed something needs to be closed or finished or whatever, and so it keeps this open loop that's spinning in your life and your psyche and and whatever, and taking up cognitive real estate essentially. So when I started my own consulting practice, I was very hungry to find good models that if it wasn't clear how to work, what a client needed, they brought me in and say, well, what do I need? It'd be great to have a model to just pull out of my pocket. And if it wasn't clear already how I could help them improve their processes and whatever they were doing, it'd be nice to find that. So I got hungry for that, then found out, in the network I was in, I met some very sophisticated consultants. One of them was Dean Acheson. I attribute to Dean, and as you know, he's been a lifelong friend. And he's the guy who came up with the technique called empty your head, everything out of it, and make next action decisions about all that and put all that in paper. So I worked with Dean for a couple of years, and we shared some clients, and then he was willing to, he said, David, you're going to take this probably a lot further than I am. And he wasn't that interested in, necessarily being much bigger than the small consulting practice that he was doing. So he was willing to share all of his, IP and best practices with me. So I spent 2 years learning a lot of that stuff, and then even in the first year or two, spending thousands of hours one-on-one actually walking people through these kinds of exercises. So I had the experience early on of how powerful that was, how much difference it made for anybody who did it. It did nothing but improve their condition, gave them more stability, more control, more ability to focus, toward meaningful things. And so, wow, that's kind of cool. And then that became a lot of the core of a lot of what my consulting was. We didn't call it coaching back then, but now you would call that coaching. I was mostly just consulting to small business owners and people in my network and so forth, startups. Then big senior guy in the corporate world, head of human resources at a big corporation, saw what I was doing. He said, wow, David, we need that kind of result in our whole culture. More stability, more control, more accountability, nothing fall through the cracks, whatever. So he said, can you design some sort of a training or seminar format that would sort of teach people, more than one person at a time, that we could maybe reach a lot of people with this methodology? So I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. So I spent a couple of months working, mostly by myself, but then tapping also with his organization development team. We designed a 2.5-day personal productivity training for executives and supervisors and managers, a pilot program for 1,000 of them over a year's period of time. And it was so highly successful, I found myself thrust into the corporate training world. Could have fooled me. But there I was. Again, that just happened to be the hungriest audience for that, because this was we did that program. This was Lockheed in California, and I did that program in 1983, 84. So and that was the time when mostly it was the sort of more mid to senior level professionals that were getting hit with the tsunami. Email was just starting up. Change was starting to happen faster and faster in the corporate environments. And so, they got really hungry for what this was, and they were willing to pay for, us coaching and training them about this. So that was then a whole lot of what the center of my career and professional life then was around just doing trainings and it was all referral based. We never did any marketing. We just picked up the phone. And they said, by the way, we heard about, can you, okay, sure. So wound up doing a lot of work, mostly in the US, some international, but for big corporations, but also churches and any kind of groups, anybody that wanted it, anybody sort of caught this, entrepreneurs, startups. So it's for everybody, but for the most part, it was in the larger organizational world where people had, training and development groups or training and development departments that then wanted this to be part of the curriculum of what they put into their culture. So that's where I spent thousands of hours, and my consulting really turned more into coaching the mid to senior level executives that wanted hands-on with this methodology themselves. They may have gone to a seminar or whatever and heard about it and say, wow, can you sit desk side with me and let me customize the implementation of this methodology with you? So that's where all that came from. So then, as I said, it took me about 20 or 25 years to figure out what I'd figured out, that it was unique and nobody else seemed to have done it. And I got some really good coaching. David, you should write the book. I said, write the book. Okay. Well, so
when was that?
So when that was 1997. So and then it took about 4 years for me to get the book out, given all that it took to formulate it and get the deal and get the publisher and get all that stuff done. So the first edition of Getting Things Done then was published in 2001. So that was really it wasn't like one morning I woke up with that, and that was like, okay, let me put 20 years of my experience with this stuff into a manual. It was not actually written as a training manual. As you know, people look at the book and go, that's too much. Oh my God, there's too much in there. So it was really written so in case I got run over by a bus, at least the manual was there, for somebody to pick it up. And I wasn't sure I could put it into a book. I got coaching, from some pretty sophisticated people who said, David, I know, if I hang out with people personally, or they can see me in person deliver this stuff, they can get motivated and maybe start doing it. But could you put this in some sort of a non-me format? In other words, some virtual format in a book, for instance. So I wasn't sure that GTD could get transferred through a book medium. So that was a big milestone for me in 2001. The first weekend it wound up on the bookshelves. I got an email from a woman back in the East Coast of the US. She said, David, wow, I picked up your book. I read it. I implemented it. Changed my life. I went, oh my God, it works.
Wow, really?
we could put this in a book. So it was actually relatively recently, Daniel, that I realized we could possibly scale this education, out beyond just the individuals like us and the coaches we had at that time. And even you, I'm not sure when you ran across our stuff, but
how was the reception, the book reception? Instant success, or it took a while?
Well, both. In terms of, in the US anyway, a best-selling nonfiction business book would be 60,000 copies, and it did that the first year. So they said, wow, okay. That's why they kept it in hardback for the second year, because they make more money selling hardbacks. But then that's why it went into paperback in 2003, and then it really took off, because it was really the kind of book that, in hardback, there are not that many bosses or managers that would buy 25 hardback books for their staff, but paperback they would, right? So yeah. It began to get sort of spread that. And then it also, because of its success in the US, and Penguin and Viking, this was pretty international publishers, and so there's then started to be interest internationally, and then then that's when they started to get to license the book to international publishers in multiple languages. So then that's when it really sort of picked up. But they told me that they said, David, sometimes the best business books sort of sleep and incubate for a year or two before they really start to take off. For one thing, in the US, by the way, back then, and probably even more now, but back then, there were 1,000 new titles, nonfiction business titles a year published. That's 3 a day, right? Yeah. So there's so much noise out there about all that the things that stick around are the people that go, well, that's kind of the topic du jour, but now that's no longer relevant. But the ones that stick around are the ones that are evergreen, have an evergreen message. That is, it's universal, it's timeless. And those things stick, and especially if they're well done and people like them, then those things stick. The same publisher who did mine did Getting to Yes, which was the big negotiation book out of the Harvard negotiation project. And Getting to Yes still is selling 100,000 copies a year, 30 years later, than when it was written. So they said, if it's an evergreen success, then, and Getting Things Done has pretty much been that, so that it's still, it's still cranking out there. Of course, I wrote the new edition, didn't change the methodology, but changed the public that was reading it. So that was more the impetus to write the second edition in 2015. Anyway, that's a short version of a long story, Daniel. So
that's perfect. And David, weren't you amazed that on the second edition you haven't to change much, or you haven't? I think if we kept on the first edition, that was perfect. The second edition, it's the language is better. I think it's more for this time. But
yeah, we spent a good bit of time, Daniel, when I wrote even the first edition, to see if this is going to be evergreen. We tried to strip every kind of business jargon and time-based kinds of things out of that. But I still talked about the Palm Pilot. I talked about Lotus Notes. I talked about some of the technology, and some people who were sensitive to that kind of stuff say, well, this book is really out of date.
Yes.
So there were some things that were not quite as evergreen as they should be. So we had to sort of clean all that up, because my professional life sort of grew up in the corporate world with corporate speak, corporate language, and so forth. And a lot of that is jargon, to other people that may not be in that corporate speak world. So we wanted to make sure we tried to make this as I say, evergreen. I'm not sure how you'll translate that when you do, but kind of timeless, that you won't say, well, that's kind of out of date now because he talked about this X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. I didn't know, I noticed this quality on the book, but I didn't know that you thought about it when you were crafting the book.
Yeah, no, yeah. It was an important an important topic. I had a great editor that was really good at recognizing those kinds of things and making sure that we stripped it out or changed it to more universal kind of language.
Excellent. I have so many topics that I would like to ask, but I have to be more critic about it. Could you tell me how 3 concepts were born? Next action. I think this is so powerful. Next action. The other thing that I really am impressed with is the horizons of focus, those levels. I think this is great, beautiful. And natural planning model. Natural planning model. The first time that I read the book, I didn't understand why David is talking about projects so much. In the 3rd chapter, I didn't get it in the first time. And then I read, and then I do lots of things, and now I see, wow, this is a huge, important part. Could you tell us a little bit about next action, horizons of focus, and natural planning?
All those showed up. And again, let me preface this by saying I've never had a formal, traditional course or class in psychology, business, or time management. None. Everything I figured out was getting down to what's the principle of things that work in this kind of way. When things really work, why do they work? What's the underlying principle there? So I suppose that's why, you know, it took me a long time to figure out what I'd figured out was pretty much unique and nobody else had done it, was because I had no preconditioning about what any of that should sound like or be. So next action, well, Dean taught me that. So I had somebody teach me that and have me experience it. I didn't figure that one out myself, but I watched how powerful it was. And I've seen, you know, and now over these 35 years, I've now watched and seen a lot of why that is so powerful. So I didn't make that one up. The natural planning model was because in my consulting work, as I started to do that, people were always going, well, how do we plan projects? And do you have a project planning model or whatever? And I said, project planning, there's got to be some universal way to plan projects. And at that time, I was dealing with a lot of corporate, you know, training, organization development people and training people and even executives, and saying, have you figured out a really good seminar or format for project planning? They said, no, we don't have any. The only ones that had anything that really worked were these high volume, huge project, you know, things like Boeing or Pfizer or some, you know, pharmaceuticals or aerospace or whatever, where they had to have a good model themselves, but mostly they designed those models themselves. And they'd come up with their own sort of unique project planning profiles and templates, you know. So they had that, but in terms of just the general corporate or professional public trying to plan projects, nobody had anything. There was no universal thing. So I don't know if it took me hours, days, or weeks to sit and think through, wait a minute, I think we're planning all the time. I think whatever. And so I just started to reverse engineer what we actually do. How do you get dressed? How do you walk out of the room? How do you even decide what to say right now? And so I just walked it back and I went, wow, well, I guess, first of all, you know, dinner. Well, why do you plan dinner? Yeah, you do plan. You don't just fumble around and hope dinner shows up. You actually have to do something about it. Well, why would you even start to begin with? Because I'm hungry. Ah, you have a purpose, right? Fulfill hunger, you know, or satisfy hunger. Great. And then what do you do? We go, well, I could get hamburgers, or we could do a barbecue, or we could just have a vegetarian dinner, or we could have soup. Ah, which one? Ah, let's make a soup. Great. Now you have a vision, right, of fulfilling your purpose. Anyway, yeah. I don't need to go through all this. It's in the book, but you know, if you watch my TEDx, in my Amsterdam TEDx, I do that model. That's really the focus of that TEDx for me, was just describing, hey, you have a purpose. You got some sort of a picture of fulfilling that purpose. And then your brain goes, wait a minute, but I don't have the soup yet. So, well, we need this, and do we have carrots? We have everything, but what time do we need to start? So then you're doing brainstorming, basically. You're basically then curating all of the potentially relevant stuff that might be associated with making soup for dinner. Then what do? You organize it. We need to go to the store and get carrots. Okay, Fine. What's the next step? You're going to go honey or meat?
And do you remember if you created different phases on the natural planning model at the first, or it started as it is now?
No, it just emerged there. The only difference back there, as you mentioned that, the only difference was when I started to actually use that, because I'd use that model, and I still do. And if I've ever brought in from a consulting standpoint, not so much from a coaching GTD standpoint, but as a consultant to a team or a project, can I help walk them through this, their own thinking about a project. And I was using the natural planning model, but the one thing that's missing there, if you're walking into a situation that's already there, is a previous step. And then I call that the consulting model, that ahead of purpose, you do current reality.
Excellent.
Because if you don't do current reality and people are starting from different standpoints, it's hard to get any agreement or alignment on any of that stuff. So the natural planning model is sort of assuming you're starting out of blue sky, out of fresh nothing. There's no previous history, to this. So, but before I would actually apply that, I said, well, why are you even bringing me in? What's true? We're losing money. How much money? By over what period of time? And how are you evaluating that? Let's get a current reality first, and then we can get what's the purpose of the project, right?
Yeah, it's so simple.
So simple. So then you ask about the horizons, and the horizons was simply, how do people set priorities? I tried to get that as simple as I could. I never had a good answer. So I sat down and tried to figure out, wait a minute, how do we all set priorities? What determines your priorities? And so again, I didn't make those up. I recognize them, right? You don't want to be off purpose about your life or your career or or whatever. So purpose is obviously the highest level. Also, principles and standards, the high level of the how. We're only going to do this if we can do it within these kind of parameters. We're not going to be illegal. We're going to be supporting our community. We're going to be, whatever. So those things become the top drivers of your decisions that you make. And then, so again, you can walk down, levels, walk down all the different levels of that. And there's different content at all those different levels. So I couldn't get it. I would love to have gotten it simpler. I couldn't. I got it as simple as I could get it. And the difference between that and it's very simple. Similar to the natural planning model, but the natural planning model is about the process you go through to generate content. The horizons are the content at these levels. The horizons just identify what is it that's driving me? What vision do I currently have?
Yeah.
And you could then also formulate the vision if that's not been clear yet. So you can also use those horizons to say, I need better content, or I need more thorough content or more detailed content on that. And you could actually walk yourself through the natural planning level about any of the horizons. You say, well, what's the purpose of coming up with a vision? So it's kind of, it's an interesting subtle matrix, between what all those are about. And all I did was look around and say, well, and nothing, I don't think any situation that I've been in completely followed all of those different steps in all of its detail. We just needed to do enough and use those as like the menus or the recipes to say, what else do we need to do to get clearer about this? So when we walk out of the room, this is not on our mind and it's getting done. So that's where all these things came from. That's how we tested all of this. It's like, does that help resolve, get clarity, get it off your mind?
Beautiful. David, speaking about the future, how do you see the GTD future for the next decade or few decades?
I don't know. I don't know, Daniel. That's a lot up to you and the people that we have brought together or who have chosen to come to this game and to say, this is good stuff, let's spread it. So I can't stop spreading it, so I'll just spread it to whoever wants it. And I have two prices for what I do, retail and free. So I'm kind of like Robin Hood, I'll take from the people who pay me retail and then do a lot of good work pro bono for people doing good work. But I couldn't stop if I wanted to.
In terms of concepts, in terms of technology, artificial intelligence, do you think, can you see any of those things interfering with the utility of GTD concepts.
No, not at all. Matter of fact, a lot of the growth of the technology has just increased the need for the GTD methodology. Because there hasn't been really any significant changes in my experience in terms of what the digital world has brought, past the word processor in the spreadsheet. Those changed the world. But basically most everything else out after them and beyond them is simply velocity and volume, right? You just have a lot faster stuff and a lot more access to that stuff.
Yeah.
More ubiquity. And so as you increase volume and speed, that also increases the frequency of change. So things are, as you and I are talking, come on, as soon as we get off doing this, you're going to check email, and that's going to blow the hell out of what you think your priorities are going to be. Right?
Yeah.
And then you'd be bored silly if you didn't have that kind of juice and that kind of ongoing and wow. See, if you know what you're doing, it's a great time to be alive. If you don't, you're toast. So using GTD to give you more clarity so you can feel more comfortable about how much time should I waste doing social media versus these other things, it's going to just any clearer space is going to help. But when we fly to Jupiter, whatever they in 2090 or whatever, you still need an in basket. You still need to capture things that are potentially relevant. You still need to decide next actions on what somebody needs to do about that if you can't do it right then. You still need to have some sort of a system that handles the results of that decision that you also then need to review and reflect on in some consistent way. So you wind up getting to Jupiter or getting off of Jupiter. So there's nothing going to change about the methodology. As soon as we moved into knowledge work, the great late Peter Drucker's idea that where you actually had to think to decide what to do, your work wasn't self-evident.
Yeah.
So that was the big change. So as soon as your work is not self-evident, or you move, or if you're in survival mode out of a crisis or whatever, then you don't need systems for that. You just need to survive. You just need to do what's next to survive, to get you to sort of where you want to go. Or if all you're doing is cranking widgets or doing whatever, and you big pile of uncranked things, then that's pretty obvious what you need to do, right?
Yeah.
It's just very few people are only doing that, and without the rest of their life, they also need to organize so they're free to sit there and crank stuff. So as soon as anybody's got anything that they can't finish in the moment that they want to keep track of, that they might want to do or decide about, you're going to need some version of this system. It doesn't have to be complex. Yeah. Obviously, as you know, a system for a 9-year-old doesn't need to be nearly as complex as it does for the CTO of a major, financial firm. But they still both have to, the 9-year-old still has to capture the note from, his or her teacher that get him to mom so she can sign it so that, they have lunch the next day. I don't know, they still got to do all that stuff.
Yeah, well, what I'm understanding is that the outside world is changing fast, but the way our mind works does not change so fast.
No, but to that point, Daniel, I'll interrupt you. To that point, the technology has moved a lot faster than our cognitive training to deal with it.
Yeah. David, we have a few minutes. I would like to invite the other guests to open their cameras and see if they want to ask some questions. If you can unmute, if you want to unmute.
I don't. Hi, David. My name is Claude. Just to let you know, I don't have any question, but GTD changed my life, the way that we work, and it's incredible. Congratulations for everything that we have been done.
Yeah, but I didn't do that. You did.
Yeah.
I just defined the game, but you're the one who plays the game.
Yeah, I had that touch with the methodology, I think 5 years ago with Daniel. Daniel by himself touched the first class in our company. And since then, we have been refreshing the methodology with the new employees and the old ones every year. And yeah. I think it's really, really fruitful and increase a lot our productivity.
Fabulous. And by the way, it mostly works to build, and it can really move an organizational culture, as I call it, up the food chain, so that you're playing at a different level of game. When things aren't falling through the cracks, you can trust people, what people are doing and not doing. You're a lot clearer about who's doing what and when and so forth. And what really makes that work is somebody like you, who's a champion internally, that can keep holding the flame. So thank you. Good work.
Yeah. Thank you.
David, I would like to ask you the relationship between GTD and happiness, and also if you could take a basket, this basket is your life. What would you put in this basket, GTD, and what other subjects would you take with you? I would say that, I don't know if you understand my question, but if you understood, that's my question. Otherwise, I could explain a little more.
Well, GTD is a process, it's not content. So first of all, happiness is highly overrated. I just read an article in a really good US magazine about grumpy people can be some of the most productive. And if you try to go create happiness, let's all be happy and let's all go play and let's have this thing, you're going to be as much turning people off as turning anybody on. And as happy as you get, that's as depressed as you'll get. I prefer thinking about it more as satisfaction. See, I don't know if you guys do people run in your culture?
Yes.
Jog?
Yes.
Catherine keeps saying, I've never seen a happy jogger. They're all,
That's true.
So that doesn't mean jogging's not good for you. It just means you're probably going to be focused on something else besides just having an emotional high. You're going to be a lot happier after you jog, probably, simply because of the endorphins that'll go into your brain. So, but again, when I say happiness is overrated, what if the happiness is the momentary, that's fun. There's nothing wrong with that. Why not? Have it as much as you want. But as I say, you don't have to like your life to get it off your mind. And I'm not a motivational speaker. And it's like, okay, I would suggest that a clear head is more important than a happy head. Now, it turns out that if you have a clear head, it's a lot easier to do the things that make you happy. So it's more of an end result than some sort of a prime driver, as far as I'm concerned. I would much rather be satisfied. And satisfaction, if you go back to the Latin, I don't know what your word in Portuguese might be, but it's enough activity, enough doing. Satis activare. Okay, so if you do enough, if you're appropriately, and that's a better word. I mean, that's why I've 2 or 3 years ago I came up with appropriate engagement as the best way to describe what GTD does. Appropriate engagement doesn't necessarily mean you're happy about something, but I'm appropriately engaged with this thing that's a pain in the butt. But I'm appropriately engaged with getting it finished or closing up or getting closure on it. That's fine. That puts you in the driver's seat of your life. So as long as you're in the driver's seat of your life, you're gonna be happy or not. But look at Olympic athletes. They don't look happy unless they win. Right. So I don't want to stage anything for some final thing before I'm feeling good about what it is that I'm doing. That makes sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's about the basket of your life and what things you put in there. It's up to you. See, GTD doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you how to process that if you want to get it off your mind. And there's an inverse relationship between on your mind and getting done. So turns out that the most productive people are the people with the emptiest heads.
Yeah, makes sense.
They just walk around being able to be present with you when you're conversing with them and their mind's not going anywhere else. Aren't those the people you like to deal with? You'd prefer to have a boss like that. You'd prefer to have an assistant like that. You'd prefer to have a life partner like that. Sure. So to me, it's all about clarity and empty and getting a clear space so you're present with whatever you're doing. And that's the whole idea of appropriate engagement. That's why it's a little counterintuitive, the GTD thing, because I'm suggesting you be as rigorous about buying cat food as writing a business plan. Why? If you don't, cat food's going to take up more cognitive real estate than it deserves and then disturb your ability to focus appropriately on the business plan. If I need cat food pops into your head twice, you're inappropriately engaged with your cat.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go very far to see, how do I get clear and satisfaction? Just start to notice anything that's on your mind and say, why is it on your mind? And then appropriately engage with it. But that's the reason things are, for the most part, on people's minds. Now, you can't stop your mind from thinking. You're doing 50,000 thoughts a day. But for me, most of it just grazing. Oh, that's kind of cool. Interesting sky. Hey, look at these guys. Aren't you guys all cool? I'm not writing any of that down. But if you said, David, could you get back to me about that? And I say, yeah, then I better write that down.
You have.
Otherwise, it's going to spin and take up cognitive real estate that's not required. That makes sense?
Sure.
So I'm not sure that was what you were asking about, but in terms of content, GTD has nothing to do with content. It has a lot to do with your content if what you want to do is get appropriately engaged with your content. But it's what you've allowed into your life. It's funny, people get mad at me for their list. I'm going, excuse me, that's not my list. That's yours. You want it? You don't want it? Yeah, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me.
Guys, we have reached our time. I prepared like 34 questions.
Well, let's do another one, Daniel. I don't care. Come on.
Yeah. But
Fine.
I appreciate so much. This is I think like a landmark for GTD in Brazil. This our first conversation. So this is why I wanted to talk about the history of things. So maybe in next year conversation we can go explore other areas. So
Sure.
Thank you so much, David. I'm very happy. Speaking about happiness and yeah, I'm very happy. Thank you so much.
No, this was fun. Thanks, Daniel. Great questions, guys. Good work. Keep up the good work.
Thank
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Take care.
David, stay safe.